الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم على رسوله الكريم وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد. So I'm very excited to begin this daunting task that has been assigned to me and all of you. Let me begin by asking Allah Azza wa Jal to bless this project, this gathering, and to increase all of us in our connection with His book. No doubt the greatest thing that we can do in our life. If you look back at your life, ask any people who are older, people who are involved in knowledge. If you ask them what are the most um, memorable and beneficial um, periods of their life, no doubt it would be those periods of their life devoted to the Book of Allah Azza wa Jal. So we are starting this 3-year journey, and 3 years, 1 hour per week. We intend to cover the entirety of the Quran, which is quite a daunting task. With Allah's help, we can do it. Obviously, this kind of program, as you know, will not be a word-to-word translation. It cannot be. And what we aim to do instead is introduce you to every single surah, the main themes of the Quran, and kind of cover each surah topically and look at selected passages as much as Allah allows. And it's 10 juz per year. So it is, if you break it down like that, this first year, we aim to cover 1/3 of the Quran. And if we do a quarter of a juz per week, then inshallah, with Allah's help, we can achieve what we aim. And to begin with, so ask Allah to put barakah in this. Allahumma anfa'na bima 'allamtana wa 'allimna bima yanfa'una ya Zil Jalali wal Ikram. So we have 1 hour every Saturday. And what I aim to do is I'll begin with some usul tafsir. So some points and reminders about how to approach the Quran from my own perspective, my own teachers. And then maybe we can do 20 minutes every week, 15 to 20 minutes of that, followed by delving into the tafsir itself. And today I'll take a little bit longer since it's the first session to introduce what we are doing and what is tafsir and some important principles that I think are very important in order to engage with tafsir. And then we'll get into, inshallah, as time permits, Surah Al-Fatihah today. Some reminders and some things I need to make everyone aware of. The opinions in this program, in this seminar, represent myself, the opinions of yours truly. So I'm not a fan of questions where people will be asking, okay, suppose, what about this person? What about this scholar? This person, or in this book it says this. I'm presenting to you my perspective. It's an exploration of tafsir. There are many, many approaches to everything in the world, including tafsir. The approaches to tafsir are very diverse, very different. There are many different arenas of scholarship within tafsir. There are different focuses. There are different individuals that approach the Quran differently. Many of them are on the same page, and they're just looking at different emphasis and focus. And sometimes there are real differences. So having said that, what I'm teaching is from my own teachers and from my perspective, what my heart has settled on. And no doubt there'll be other perspectives out there. So that shouldn't really intimidate anyone. It shouldn't make you uncomfortable. Just if you're sincere, you want to learn from the Book of Allah, just know that Allah will bless you in your endeavors, and you have to think. And I want everyone to think. I'm not a fan of making clones. We don't want everyone to think the same way. We don't want everyone to be copies of each other. But we want to inspire. If the seminar is successful, my aim is to hope to inspire you to look at the Quran differently, to engage in the Quran. Maybe you'll come up with your own insights. Maybe you'll go in a different direction from where we're going. And inshallah, that's all good. All the, say, barakah, be part of a group that is studying the Book of Allah. Having said that, a little bit about my background in I guess, from the perspective of Tafsir. So I spent most of my life, the most influential tafsir for me has no doubt been Tafhim al-Quran by the great scholar Mawlana Maududi rahimahullah ta'ala. And so that is a remarkable tafsir that I think still is understudied and underappreciated. From the time it was written in the 1940s and onwards, it was one of the first tafsir works that is widespread in circulation, translated in multiple languages. So entire generations of people have been raised studying or coming to Islam through this tafsir in English and various languages translated. So that's always been my starting point. And then over the years, I branched out. And recently, I rediscovered the tafsir through like this particular English translation, which is the newer translation by Zafar Ishaq Ansari, rahimahullah. So he died before completing it, but I think a group of editors to continue to complete it. So it's pretty much available in its entirety except for like 2 volumes or 3 volumes. So this is a remarkable work. It's done very well. The English is impeccable. And those who can read Urdu, the original, the Tafhim al-Quran, is much more eloquent and it's brilliant. This is always my base. It's not the only tafsir I study, but it's always generally my starting point, and sometimes it's my end point. Sometimes I don't need to go anywhere else. Beyond that, you have also Zayd Qutb fi Dilal al-Quran, which Adil Salahi has translated in remarkable ways. It's a pleasure to read. The English itself is beautiful. So both of these works are very similar in their approach and trying to bring you the message of the Quran. And they don't agree with everything in any book. And nobody should agree with anything, every single thing in any book, or every single thing from any human being, except for the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So there's a beautiful quote that always inspires me, and there are a number of quotes that should be in your mind, etched in your mind, and they really remove a lot of misunderstanding, heartache. Ibn Rajab, I believe, Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali said, يَأْبَى اللَّهُ الْعِصْمَةَ لِكِتَابٍ غَيْرَ كِتَابِ اللَّهِ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ. That يَأْبَى اللَّهُ, Allah has refused, isma is protection, from any book in the world other than His book. So there is no perfect book in the world except the book of Allah. So any other book, whether it's a book of tafsir or a book of elaboration, is bound to have mistakes. I've authored maybe 6 or 7 books now and translated many. Every time I look at one of my works, I find mistakes, typos or mistakes or things that could have been better. The first book I wrote was a Tajweed textbook, and I must have gone through the book and like revisions and drafts maybe over 20, 30 times. And then before finally publishing it, and then years later, second edition, third edition, even now when I look at it, there's mistakes. So that's the nature of human works. يَأْبَى اللَّهُ الْعِصْمَةَ لِكِتَابٍ غَيْرَ كِتَابِ اللَّهِ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ. So in terms of tafsir, so in English, those are the 2 works that I rely on. And in Arabic, there are many, many works. Alhamdulillah, Arabic is rich. There's some beautiful works out there. So if we're looking there, in Arabic, the genres of tafsir, that's a question for another time, but they're remarkable works. It depends on what you're looking for. You're looking for the basic message and something short and insightful. Then for me, Sheikh Saadi's tafsir is remarkable. It's very easy to follow in Arabic. And If you're looking for more detail, like Qurtubi is remarkable for the fiqh of the Quran. Um, Zamakhshari is remarkable for the language. Ibn Ashur, the Tunisian scholar, is remarkable for like the eloquence and digging into the language. And then you have short tafsir, Ibn Juzay al-Kalbi. So they're tremendous there's a tremendous array of options for you. And it doesn't matter which book you pick. Uh, you know, your engagement with the Quran, you should have one or two solid works that you're relying on. It could be any one of these, and I'm not obligating anyone to follow any of these works in particular. But it's so long as you have one solid book that you're focusing on, you're engaging in the Quran with that, and then you branch out. You always need to have a base, and then you branch out. You have a base where you hold on to, and then from there you branch out, and then you refine. Even if the base is not so good, it's a book that may have mistakes. But then when the more you study, the more you think about the Quran, make tadabbur, study with scholars, read other books, you will refine your thinking. So the final thing I'll say in the intro is, so in terms of scholars that I've been associated with and respected tafsir, so there are basically two scholars that I've spent most of my life with. The primary influence on my life has been the late Maulana Muhammad Yusuf Islahi, rahimahullah ta'ala. He was a great scholar from India, passed away recently, rahimahullah. Um, he died beyond the age of 100, and he spent in most of his life memorized at a young age, so almost like 100 years of his life, 80 years, you can say. Um, his passion was tafsir and teaching tafsir, and he used to come to the US a lot. And so uh, I knew him from 1978, before many of you were born. He used to stay in our house in the 70s, and then he always stayed in New Jersey during Ramadan. He spent Ramadans here, and every time he gave a talk, it was always about tafsir. So he has remarkable vision about tafsir. I spent a lot of time with him. He was so. What was his background in tafsir in particular? He was a student of Akhtar Ahsan Islahi, who was a primary student of the best student of Maulana, a great scholar, Maulana Abdul Hamid Farahi, rahimahullah ta'ala. In tafsir, the most interesting figure in modern times is Maulana Farahi, without a doubt, because many of the great scholars of our time, many of the books, especially in the East, they trace their thought to the work that was done by Sheikh Farahi. So many of the individuals they're accustomed to hearing, Dr. Israr Ahmad, Maulana Maududi, even he met him at a young age, was inspired by him. They don't follow him exactly. No one's a clone of anyone, but everyone takes their ideas and develops them further in their own unique way. So Maulana Islahi, who I'm talking about, he was a direct repository of the knowledge and legacy of Farahi through his main student, Akhtar Ahsan Islahi. In fact, Maulana Islahi used to say um, the personal notes of Maulana Farahi, much of his work was unpublished. Um, he used to have in his own house, Maulana Yusuf Islahi. And the second scholar that I'm inspired by and spend a lot of time with is our dear scholar, Sheikh Muhammad Akram Nadwi, rahimahullah, hafidhahullah. So he is very much inspired by Farahi as well. Most of his ideas come from Farahi. His in tafsir, he was a student of Shahbaz Islahi, who was a student of Akhtar Ahsan Islahi, who was a student of Farahi, as I mentioned. So these are my two influences in tafsir, Sheikh Akram Nadwi and Maulana Yusuf Islahi. So a lot of what I learned and a lot of what I share comes from them. In fact, everything that we do comes from our teachers, and may Allah reward all of them. So with that introduction, I wanted to begin by sharing a presentation about Usul al-Tafsir. So I'll be sharing bits and pieces of this idea of tafsir or usul al-tafsir, the genre known as usul al-tafsir, which gives you like a good background engagement with the Quran. It helps you, it gives you tools in order to understand the Quran and to benefit from it. So we will not do the entire presentation. This is not a usul al-tafsir class, it's a tafsir class, but I'll take a few moments each week, inshallah, share like an insight from some great scholars, others, Shah Waliullah rahimahullah, Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, Farahi, and others. So Bismillah. So let's begin. So I'd like to begin by quotes from great minds and thinkers, because they inspire you, they put you in a framework and a mindset. So Imam al-Ghazali, rahimahullah, in Ihya Ulumuddin has an amazing quote that I came across some Ramadans ago. It's just something uplifting and inspires you. So we're studying the Quran. What is the Quran? You need to realize what it is that you're studying. And if you have that right perspective, it makes all the difference. So he said, فَكَلَامُ اللَّهِ كَالْمَلِكِ الْمَحْجُوبِ الْغَائِبُ وَجْهُهُ النَّافِذُ أَمْرُهُ. He said the Quran is like a king that's veiled, an unseen king in deepest cover. الْغَائِبُ وَجْهُهُ النَّافِذُ أَمْرُهُ, but whose authority is everywhere and established. So it's a mighty king in the deepest cover. You can't really see it directly, his face, but his authority is everywhere. وَكَالشَّمْسِ الْغَزِيرَةِ الظَّاهِرَةِ مَكْنُونٌ عُنْصُرُهَا. And it's like a blazing, scorching sun whose body is concealed. You can't really see the sun's body, but the rays are no doubt there. They're blazing and scorching. You can see the rays. وَكَالنَّجُومِ الزَّهْرَةِ الَّتِي قَدْ يُهْتَدَى بِهَا مَنْ لَا يَقِفْ عَلَى سَيْرِهَا. And they are like bright. The Quran is like a bright, shining star, or like the stars in the sky at night that guide the lost on their journey. فَهُوَ مِفْتَاحُ الْخَزَائِنِ النَّفِيسَةِ. It is a key to invaluable treasure. وَشَرَابُ الْحَيَاةِ الَّذِي مَنْ شَرِبَ مِنْهُ لَمْ يَمُتْ. And it's the elixir of life. It's the drink of life that the one who drinks from it will never die. وَدَوَاءُ الْأَسْقَامِ الَّذِي مَنْ سَقَى مِنْهُ لَمْ يَسْمُتْ. And it's a remedy for disease, such that whoever takes this cure will never be, it's an everlasting cure, will never be sick again. So, inspiring words. The Quran, you really need to understand what the Quran is, and the majesty, the grandeur, the value of the Quran that you're studying. The more you realize that, the more benefit you will get from the Quran. The second quote is from Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah. He said, "Man lam yaqra al-Quran faqad hajarahu." Ibn Taymiyyah was a Quranic scholar. His ideas and his thought was steeped in the Quran. And he is, in fact, in our entire tradition, the first person who actually wrote a book on usul al-tafsir. And he lived in the 700s Hijrah. So it's kind of remarkable. For 700 years, no one ever wrote a book on how to approach tafsir, a separate book. People wrote tafsir books, and great scholars, they wrote tafsir books. Within their tafsir works, they have writings about tafsir and the idea of usul al-tafsir. But as a genre itself, usul al-tafsir, Ibn Taymiyyah was the first one who compiled a treatise. It's called Muqaddimatun fi Usul al-Tafsir. So you can see his ideas are very much steeped in the Quran. Many of his fatwa, many of his ideas, he's always quoting the Quran. So he has this quote that really is important for us to look at. It's more practical than the previous quote. Whoever does not recite the Quran, مَنْ لَمْ يَقْرَأِ الْقُرْآنَ فَقَدْ هَجَرَهُ, has abandoned it. This is a reflection of the verse where the Prophet is saying, "My people have abandoned the Quran." So that idea of abandoning the Quran should really frighten us. So what does it mean to abandon the Quran? So he gave some levels here. He said the first, whoever does not read the Quran has abandoned it. First step, not abandoning the Quran, is to open the book and read it. وَمَنْ قَرَأَ الْقُرْآنَ وَلَمْ يَتَدَبَّرَهُ فَقَدْ هَجَرَهُ. Whoever reads the Quran but doesn't think about it has abandoned it. So it's not enough just to read the Quran. You have to understand its meanings and reflect over them. Tadabbur. Allah says, أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ أَمَّا عَلَى قُلُوبٍ أَقْفَالُهَا. Do they not reflect or deeply deliberate, ponder over the Quran? Or are their locks over their hearts? So the second level, even if you read it and you're not really thinking about it, then you have abandoned it. And finally, وَمَنْ تَدَبَّرَ الْقُرْآنَ وَلَمْ يَعْمَلْ بِهِ فَقَدْ هَجَرَهُ. Whoever ponders the Quran but doesn't act upon it has abandoned it. You can see the Quran requires many things from us. First, we need to understand its importance. We need to open it and read it. We need to think about it, and then we need to live it. If you bypass any of those steps, then you have abandoned the Quran. May Allah protect us. So just two quotes I wanted to begin with before I get into the topic itself. Now, Tafsir, Usul al-Tafsir, when you talk about Usul al-Tafsir, you have to talk about Tafsir. So Tafsir is, there is a danger with Tafsir. There could be a problem with Tafsir, a potential problem with Tafsir. How could there be a problem with Tafsir? Here's a quote. I read this book, Thomas Jefferson's Quran, many years ago. When I read this book, there was a quote in there that really intrigued me. Like I couldn't get it out of my mind. And it's this quote by John Leland. So John Leland was a friend, and he was a Baptist minister. He was like the minister for Thomas Jefferson. So they both crafted the Bill of Rights. It's an interesting book. He's not talking about the Quran, but he's talking about the Thomas Jefferson and some of the founding fathers, their engagement with what they knew about Islam and their engagement with the Quran. The idea that Thomas Jefferson had his own copy of the Quran with footnotes that he was reading. We knew he was reading the Quran. So, I mean, they were great thinkers, and but John Leland, one of the ministers who crafted the Bill of Rights, he writes this in the book. Well, not in this book. He writes it in one of his letters. It will remind a man of an article in Al-Quran. That's how they used to write it back then. That the world stands upon a great ox. The ox stands upon a great stone. The stone rests upon the shoulders of an angel, and the angel stands upon God knows what. And so this is a quote that, like, think about that for a moment. I want you to all think about it. Like the world stands upon an ox, and the ox on a stone, and the stone on an angel, and the angel upon God knows what. Where does it say that in the Quran? Like, so that I thought about that. Like, these were good thinkers, and I mean, they were scholars. I mean, we don't agree with many of they weren't believers, but I mean, you can't say they were dumb individuals. So why would they say something like that? Like, he had a copy of the Quran himself. Someone who has a copy of the Quran, his friend says this or writes this. Like, the first question is there a verse in the Quran? Like that's the first question. And obviously we know there is not. There is no verse in the Quran like that. I mean, that's a nonsensical idea, right? Or is it nonsensical? Is the world on the shoulders of an ox? And so just think about that idea settled in my mind, and I thought about it over the years. And, I really believe, like, when things like that happen, like people say things like that, they must have gotten them from somewhere. Like, intelligent people don't just make things up out of thin air. I mean, many people do, but not intelligent people. So, over the years, that idea was in my mind until one day, some years later, I found where it came from. And you will not believe where it came from. It comes from Tafsir Ibn Kathir, rahimahullah, great scholar. But in his Tafsir, if you look up Surah Noon wal qalami wa ma yasturu, Surah Al-Qalam. If you look up that surah, the first thing Ibn Kathir says after saying his Makki or Madani, the very first thing he says, Noon وهو حوت عظيم على طيار الماء البحر. Noon is the name of a huge whale in a major sea. And then Ibn Kathir spends a page and a half sharing hadith after hadith after hadith, and all the hadith are there are various types of hadith, but they're basically saying that the first thing Allah created was this giant whale, and then He wrote destiny of everything, and then the whale was in the water. And one of those hadith is that the earth ala qarni thawrin, that the earth rests upon the horns of an ox, and the ox is standing upon a stone. And every time the ox moves or breathes, an earthquake happens in the earth. So the source of earthquakes is because the earth is on the horns of an ox. And so this is from hadith. And this hadith, unfortunately, is in Al-Hakim. And Al-Hakim says about it that Sahihun ala shart al-shaykhain. The hadith is authentic on the conditions of Bukhari and Muslim. So, so there's so many problems that open up. So the reason I'm sharing this with you is that tafsir can be a problem. So that's the idea I'm trying to share with you. Tafsir can be a problem. And it has been a problem. And we're not talking about obscure tafsir. We're talking about Ibn Kathir himself. If you read his tafsir, at least on this surah and the first couple of pages, this is what you learn. So these founding fathers, non-Muslims, they must have come across this in some work, and they're not literate in Arabic. So reading a book of tafsir, John Leland at least confused this teaching with the Quran itself. He confused the tafsir with the Quran itself. So reading the Quran is not the same thing as reading tafsir. So that's very important to know. Reading the Quran is not the same thing as reading tafsir. It's not always when the believer recites the Quran or is commanded to recite the Quran, it doesn't mean go read book of tafsir. Yes, tafsir is important. Of course, it's important. But it can be a hindrance. It can be a hindrance, and it has been a hindrance in preventing people from getting the message of the Quran, or confusing the message of the Quran, or muddling the message of the Quran. How many tafsir that you read, and they just go into tangents on and on and on in various ways. But the words of Allah, you get so far away from the words of Allah, you wind up just staying in that muddled universe, and you never come back to the words of Allah. So this is very, very important, an idea to think about. And then over the years, so this hadith, thankfully, it's not we have scholars of hadith, we have people that sifted through this, and not all of them were of the same level, but although thankfully this hadith is not in Bukhari, it's not in Muslim, not in any of the 6 books, but it is in Al-Hakim, and unfortunately he said what he said, that it's authentic, which it is not. But here's what Ibn al-Qayyim says about this hadith. He has a great book about fabricated hadith in the world and how to recognize fabricated hadith. So he says, وَمِنْ هَذَا حَدِيثٌ إِنَّ الْأَرْضَ عَلَى صَخْرَةٍ وَالصَّخْرُ صَخْرَةُ عَلَى قَرْنِ ثَوْرٍ فَإِذَا حَرَّكَ الثَّوْرُ قَرْنَهُ تحركت الصخرة فتحركت الأرض وهي زلزلة. So this is the hadith, that the earth is on the stone, the earth is on a stone, the stone is on the horns of a bull, and every time the bull moves, the stone moves, and then the earth moves, and that's what an earthquake is. So he says, وَالْعَجَبُ مِنْ مُسَوِّدِ كُتُبَهُ بِهَذِهِ الْهَذَيْنَةِ. He said, strange how people blacken their books with these deliriums. So he said it like it is. He said, I am amazed how some people were able to blacken their, meaning fill their books. Like a book is white pages, and when you write in it with black ink, people write in their books with these types of delusions. Have they not? And he says, وَلَيْسَ الْعَجَبُ مِنْ جُرْأَةِ مِثْلَ هَذَا الْكَذَّابِ عَلَى اللَّهِ. He says, the real amazement is not from the audacity of the one who lied upon Allah, made this up. إنما العجب ممن يدخل هذا الحديث في كتب العلم من التفسير وغيره ولا يبين أمره. And it's obvious who he was talking about. It's this hadith not only in Ibn Kathir, not to pick on Ibn Kathir, it's also in Al-Baghawi and most of the books of hadith, books of tafsir rather. Many of the books of tafsir have this hadith in that surah. So he says the real amazement is not that people have audacity to lie. Those are liars. They do that. But the real amazement for Ibn al-Qayyim was, how could anyone put this in books of knowledge and books of tafsir without clarifying their status? So that's the problem with tafsir. And then when I read Imam al-Ghazali, Ihya Ulumuddin, he's an amazing thinker. And he's a deconstructionist. He says things you would never be accustomed to thinking about, because great thinkers, they make you think differently. They deconstruct your ideas. So I found this idea in his Ihya, and I was very surprised. And he writes a section about the detractors from understanding the Quran. So he has a beautiful section where the barriers, the hujab. He talks about the hujab, which are the barriers to understanding Quran. What are all the things that prevent people from understanding Allah's message? And one of those he mentions is tafsir. So he mentions tafsir as a potential barrier to understanding the Quran. So he says it right here. وَرَابِعُهَا أَنْ يَكُونَ قَدْ قَرَأَ تَفْسِيرًا ظَاهِرًا وَاعْتَقَدَ أَنَّهُ لَا مَعْنَى لِكَلِمَاتِ الْقُرْآنِ إِلَّا مَا تَنَاوَلَهُ النَّقْلُ عن ابن عباس ومجاهد وغيرهما، وأن ما وراء ذلك تفسير بالرأي، وأن من فسر القرآن برأيه فقد تبوأ مقعده من النار، فهذا أيضا من الحجب العظيمة. So he says the fourth detractor from understanding the Quran is tafsir, a potential distractor. That's what he means. No one's saying don't read tafsir, but try to understand the idea, the point. Tafsir can be a distraction, because he says some people read tafsir and they wind up believing that this is what Allah is saying, and there's no other possibility beyond what this tafsir says. So then, even if that could be like a naql from Ibn Abbas, Mujahid, and people might think, well, thinking beyond that is blameworthy, is tafsir bil ra'i. So keep that in mind. No, I remember me and Faizan had a discussion many, many years ago, like 20, must have been over 20 years ago. We were talking about qira'at and tafsir, and I don't remember the exact question, but I remember the idea that we talked about is that, Allah's book is an ocean. The kalam of Allah is not like any other kalam. So Allah's Quran can never be limited by anything. And just as it cannot be limited by anything, no human book can encompass the meanings of the Quran in one binding. So no book of tafsir can give you all the meanings of the Quran. That's why everyone has a different favorite tafsir book. You don't have one authoritative tafsir book in the world, and you will never be able to. It cannot happen, because all tafsir books are human beings who attempt to understand the book of Allah or present different aspects of that to you. And they're great scholars. They do a great job. The genre of tafsir is amazing, but no single human book can encompass the beauty of the book of Allah in one book, one binding. And so you should never have this idea, never believe that what is in a human book of tafsir, this is the only thing that the Quran is saying. There is no possibility beyond that. That's what Imam al-Ghazali was teaching us. So yeah. So in terms of questions and comments, I don't mind having discussion along the way. I did not give you a chance yet because we didn't really cover much yet. But if anyone has like comments or questions, very briefly, I can take brief throughout the session. And then towards the end, maybe the last 5 to 10 minutes, we can take some questions. Then you have a discussion board as well where you can post things and we can continue discussing there. We are limited for time. We have exactly 1 hour, and we have about 24 minutes left. And we do need to cover some things. And there's another class coming up, so we can't go beyond the time. Any questions so far?
Somebody asked, is tafsir isn't tafsir of the words of Allah part of the revelation? And if so, it's also preserved?
No, it's never part of the revelation. The seed of the words of Allah is a human being. Like, right, if I give you tafsir today, if I tell you something about Surah Al-Fatihah today, those are my words. How can that be part of revelation? Well, revelation is a kalam of Allah. That's the only revelation. Beyond that, there is a system of preservation. So we'll talk about that, like, so I'm going to cover that. Like, so there's Ibn Taymiyyah has 3 essential steps for understanding the Quran, and I'll do this next week because now I think we need to move on. But there are many important things to understand: what tafsir is, who does tafsir. Sometimes the Quran itself does tafsir, and then sometimes the Prophet did tafsir, and that's different from then human beings did tafsir. So tafsir is a little bit broader than that. So, but the revelation that's protected is only the Quran. Everything else beyond that goes through a system of checks and balances.
I can rapid fire a couple other questions, and inshallah, feel free to address whichever ones make sense to address. Are translations also considered a form of tafsir?
Oh, absolutely. Every translation is a tafsir. That's my understanding, for sure, because no translation can encompass the meaning of the Quran entirely. So just keep this idea in mind. Kalam of Allah, Allah's kalam is amazing. Allah's kalam is something that, the words of Allah, fadlu, there's a hadith, fadlu kalamillahi ala sa'iril kalam ka fadlillahi ala sa'iri khalqihi. The virtue of Allah's kalam over all the rest of the kalam, like words of human beings, is like the virtue of Allah over his creation. I mean, there's no comparison. So the kalam of Allah is qualitatively, fundamentally, essentially different from any other speech and words in the world. It will never be the same. So surely, if you keep that in mind, then then you will understand that only the Quran is preserved in that way. The others have a different preservation process, but even tafsir, even hadith, even the words of the Prophet ﷺ, they're historical reports that need to be verified and authenticated. But only Allah's words, Allah protected in some way. But He also protected, He has a system of preservation that's part of like the protection of the Quran, which is the Sunnah and the scholarship and things like that. But the Quran, the qualitative preservation of the words of Allah does not apply to anything else, not words of tafsir, not words of hadith, not words of anything else.
So if there's one book that people want to reference and kind of use as a part of their journey, that green newer translation of Tafhim al-Quran, is that what you would recommend over other versions or translations?
No, I can't say that. That's what so it's a good question, but so first, there's one book that everyone needs to, one book undoubtedly that everyone needs to read, and that should be your journey, and that is the Quran itself. Nothing else. I will never go beyond that and say any other book is mandatory. The Quran is what you need. Now, to understand the Quran, you need tools and you need like some ways of delving into it. My personal starting point is this, but I cannot say that this is better than other books out there. It's better than a lot of books that I have read and is what I like, but every single person has a different way of thinking. You have different styles, and not everyone reads the same thing that has the same interest. So this is remarkable. I would recommend it. It's a personal recommendation, but it's not a binding one. So there may be other people have experiences. There are plenty of great scholars in the world that went through different approaches. They read different books, different languages. So the primacy of the Quran refuses for us to recommend any other book like in its entirety without reservations. So that's all I say for that.
Very nice. I think we can continue. There's a couple other questions, but I think you kind of touched upon them. There's a question about if there's a tafsir that's closer to understanding the life of the Prophet ﷺ, or that's kind of more seerah based. But you talked about many tafsir and kind of their highlights. And then there's a question about tafsir and tadabbur. And if you think that's worth it, then we can take it. Otherwise,
Yeah,
we can.
we'll take it throughout this. Like
Sure.
this is what we're going to be speaking about over the 3 years. So we'll come back to these ideas. So we have 19 minutes. And if we save the last five, we have 15 minutes to do Surah Al-Fatiha. So Bismillah, Surah Al-Fatiha. Let me share.
While you're pulling that up, I do remember that quote that you mentioned. I remember I just asked you in passing about the different tafsir and qira'at, and I remember that was a very profound answer. So it really shaped my thinking as well. And so I think a lot of people will benefit from the principles and the explanation that we're going to learn over these 3 years, inshallah.
So Bismillah. So let's begin with Surah Al-Fatiha. And so this class is not going to be detailed tafsir of every surah, not even Fatiha. So we're just sharing an approach. We're going over major meanings. So it's a qualitatively different class from, like, say, a word-to-word tafsir class or a detailed tafsir class. The tafsir class of the entire Quran can take up to 10 years of hours and hours a day, for instance. 1 hour a week. We're just introducing you to major ideas and all the Quranic themes, inshallah. But we'll pause and discuss various things. One of the interests that I'll like, what I'm exploring and what we'll be doing is I'm very much interested in the Farahi, Maulana Farahi, rahimahullah. His idea was to look at the Quran as a cohesive text, as a book, a text. And when you look at the Quran like that, then it has an order, it has a beauty, it has a symmetry, it has a structure. So, like, an overall arcing survey of the Quran that we're doing, I guess we'll focus more on, like, looking at these structural elements and symmetry in the Quran. And so I guess that's one of the things that I'll be focusing on. Allahu Alam. So broadly, the meanings. So we'll go through the meanings, at least of the short surah. So أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. So Bismillah ar-Rahman, the Basmala is a with the name of Allah, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. So Rahman and Rahim, two attributes of Allah from His mercy. They're translated as compassionate, most merciful, and then I guess um, you can interchange it, merciful, most compassionate, because the meanings are very similar. They're actually the same meaning, but just a different emphasis. Arabic works like that. It emphasizes different things, and shifting emphasis of the same meaning sometimes creates new meanings. So one of the explanations of Rahman or Fa'alan, that form is something that's explosive, that's vertical, that's huge, that's massive. So Rahman would be the one who shows massive mercy, explosive mercy. His mercy is like huge, it's immense, it's unrecognized, it's unmistakable. But Rahim, the Fa'il form, is something that's more continuous, more abiding. So you can say Rahman is like a tsunami and Rahim is like a steady flow of a river that continues to flow. So putting them together, the idea is Allah is merciful beyond measure. Allah is so merciful in so many ways that His mercy is immense, it's explosive, it's huge, and it's a perpetual. So there are different explanations given. This is not the class for that, but Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim is the opening of every surah except for Surah At-Tawbah. And in Surah Al-Fatiha, there's a debate whether it's the first verse or not. So if it's the first verse, then this is verse number 1. If it's just a standalone like the other surahs, then that's another approach. And they both have precedence from early times. Then they consider the rest of the verses to be slightly different. So Surah Al-Fatiha, we know for sure. So we know a couple things about it. The Prophet ﷺ in Sahih al-Bukhari, he described it as أعظم السور في القرآن. It is the greatest of all the chapters of the Quran. So it is the greatest surah of the Quran. And its name is Al-Fatiha, the opener. Fataha means to open. Al-Fatih, the opening, the one who opened, the fa'il form. Al-Fatiha, the opener. So Surah Al-Fatiha, the opener. Um, why is it named that? So every surah that we look at will have a name, and the first thing that Mufassirin do is they look at the name and see, well, does this name tell us something about the surah? Does it reflect the content of the surah, or is it just a name from one of the words? So the next surah is what? Al-Baqarah, Surah Al-Baqarah, the cow. Is Surah Al-Baqarah about a cow? No, that's not the content. But there is this particular passage that references a cow. So sometimes the names just come incidentally from a particular word that's unique in the surah. But sometimes they reflect what the surah is qualitatively. So Surah Al-Fatiha, no doubt, reflects what the surah is. This is the opening. This surah, Surah Al-Fatiha, is the greatest surah in the Quran. Allah says about it in the Quran itself, Sabr al-Mathani wal-Quran al-Azim. So it has 7 oft-repeating verses. So that the Quran itself says that. So we know it has 7 verses. We know it's the greatest surah of the Quran. And we know it's called Al-Fatiha. So it is, why is it called Al-Fatiha? What does it open? First of all, it opens the Quran. Being the first surah, it opens the Quran, and the rest of the Quran is comes after Al-Fatiha. Also, there are many, many other meanings, but let's leave it at that and look at the surah itself. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, Maliki Yawmiddin, Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in, اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. So if we follow this scheme of, there's a difference of numbering scheme of the word. We know it has 7 verses, but depending on the opinion you follow, it has different numbering schemes. So verse 1, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Verse 2, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. All praise and thanks belongs to Allah, the Lord of all the worlds. Alam is world, Alameen is many worlds. So you can translate Lord of the universe, the entire universe, the Lord of all worlds. The sense is it's everything, everything that exists. So in Alhamdu, there's a discussion about Alhamdu. Hamd is to praise Allah. So praising Allah. Hamd is when you praise Allah for His qualities and His blessings and the things that He showers upon you and the things that He possesses. So hamd generally is praise. Here it doesn't just say we praise Allah. It doesn't say Ahmadullah or Nahmadullah. We say that sometimes in our speeches. Nahmaduhu wa nasta'inuhu. But here, Alhamdulillah, the expression in Arabic reflects the following idea that not only is we praise God, we praise Allah, but all praise is for Allah alone and no one else. But like it has this exclusive sense. So every type of praise belongs to Allah and it does not belong to anyone else. It's much more comprehensive. So Alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alameen. The fact that this is verse number 2 or verse number 1 in the scheme of the others tells you something. So all these things, there's nothing random in the Quran. This is the first verse, just you need to reflect over why is the first verse in the entire Quran, 6,000 plus verses, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. So there must be some significance and worth there. And then Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. So the most gracious, most merciful, the one full of mercy. Maliki Yawmiddin, the owner of the day of judgment. So the majority of reciters read this Maliki Yawmiddin. Actually, the majority of Quranic imams read it Maliki Yawmiddin. Ibn Juzay al-Kalbi, the Andalusian scholar, says that is more proper and it's closer to the Arabic Maliki Yawmiddin. That's the difference. Malik is an owner. Malik is king. So they both mean king, master. They have similar meanings, but Malik is more like an owner, and Malik is like the king, and it has much deeper meaning. So Allah is the owner of the Day of Judgment for sure, but He's also the King of the Day of Judgment. It's going to be His day, His authority, His sovereignty. So the image of the Day of Judgment, there is a throne on the Day of Judgment. There is an hisab, there is standing before Allah. So the image works very well with Malik. They're both authentic. The Quran is revealed with this multiplicity. That's a subject for another day. But so Maliki Yawmiddin and Maliki Yawmiddin. So Allah is no doubt both. But Malik is a little richer, according to Ibn Juzay al-Kalbi. I remember Sheikh, the blind Sheikh from Egypt, that was so eloquent. His name Abdul Hamid Kishk. So he had a lecture where he said, Maliku yahkum, al-Maliku yamlik wa la yahkum, wal-Malak wa Malik yahkum wa la yamlik. أن الله هو يملك ويحكم وهو مالك والملك. This says Malik is an owner, but not necessarily the one who has command. But a Malik is the one who has command, but not necessarily the owner. But the only one who has complete ownership and complete command is Allah. That's why he's Malik and Malik. Maliki Yawmiddin, Malik Yawm. And then Iyyaka na'budu wa Iyyaka nasta'in. You alone we worship. You alone we seek help. Na'bud, ibadah, worship. Nasta'in, isti'ana from aun. Aun is to help, right? Wallahu fi auni al-abdi ma kana al-abdu fi auni akhihi. There's a hadith. Allah is in the help of his slave, as long as that slave is in the help of or in the service of someone else. So in the form in nasta'in, isti'ana means to seek help. So we worship Allah and we seek help from Allah. Well, the word should be na'buduka wa nasta'inuka. But now when Allah changes the order, that's because of an emphasis. So iyaka comes first now, the object. So the meaning is we worship you, right? Even in English, you do the same thing. The sentence should be we worship you. But when you take the object out and you say you, we worship, you kind of change the emphasis because we're emphasizing Allah. All these are attributes of Allah. So we're emphasizing that. So iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. So the deeper meaning that's created is that you alone, only you we worship, no one else. Only from you we seek aid and assistance and no one else. So that's a beautiful expression and the central part of Surah Al-Fatiha. And then the center of Surah Al-Fatiha is this. Ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim. Ihdina, guide us to the straight path, sirat al-mustaqim. And then we describe the path, sirat al-ladhina an'amta alayhim, the path of those who you bestowed your favors upon, not the path of those who earned your wrath, maghdubi alayhim, wala nor those who went astray. So this surah in essence is a prayer, is a dua. That's why it's so powerful, so important. That's why every one of our salah, like all our rak'ahs, have to have Surah Al-Fatiha. Minimum of 17 times a day we recite this. It is a dua. In essence, it is dua. So this surah is a dua, and the rest of the Quran is an answer. So it's not just like an introduction it's an introduction to the rest of the Quran, like a muqaddimah, but it's also a prayer, dua, and the Quran is the answer. What is the dua? Guide us. If there's one word that's a summary of the surah, is ihdina. That's the central word here. Ihdina, guide us. But then guide us to what? The straight path. And then there's some details about the straight path. Prior to guide us, it's some affirmations and praising Allah and like affirming that we worship Him and seek help from Him. But the central part is ihdina. And that is why, like when you read the Quran, you have to find links. So this must be linked to the next surah. There has to be a wisdom in the order. Surah Al-Baqarah, how does it begin? Alif Lam Mim, yes, but skip that. ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابِ, this is the book. When you just say this is the book, that's not really like meaningful statement. But if you understand it with Surah Al-Fatiha, you understand you're making dua, Allah guide us, and Allah says, this is it. That's the answer. That's why Surah Al-Baqarah begins with ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابِ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ, guidance for the highest. He uses the word guidance. So this is the significance of Surah Al-Fatiha. Very, very important surah. and we have not done justice to Tafsir, but just want to introduce that. I want to introduce you to, so in terms of structure and cohesion, there's this nice article in the Yaqeen Institute website. Um, and my dear brother Asif Barla shared it with me, and I was quite amazed. Structural cohesion in the Quran. So this is looking at Surah Al-Fatihah from a structural perspective of symmetry. It's quite amazing. You look at there's from his perspective, there's a ring structure in the surah. So verse 1, 2, 3 is about worship. Verse 4 is about worship and prayer, and then verse 5 to 7 at the end is about prayer. So you have worship beginning with worship, ending with dua, and then in the middle you have dua, and there's a symmetry. Then there's another symmetry in verse 1 to 3 that there's Allah's grandeur, and then Allah's mercy, then Allah's mercy, then Allah's grandeur again. So there's like the mercy is in between other qualities of Allah, referencing His awesomeness, His greatness, and then you have prayer. But if you look at, so I'm not going to go through this. My time is almost up, but this is the summary of the entire surah, like in terms of the symmetric perspective. You have this ring here, ring here, ring here, and the central part for him is like it's here. You alone we ask. It should be more guide us on the straight path. So there's another interesting part here is like the first part is about Allah, the second part is about human beings. So first part we're praising Allah, right? And then after you ask for guidance, now it's human beings, those who earned your favors, not those who earned your wrath or those who went astray. So if you look at this symmetry, the part A, the first section is the the worshipped, who we worship, verse 1, 2, 3, and then Iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'in is where the worshipped and the worshippers are referenced. So now you're referencing the idea of you worshiping Him and you turning to Him for help. So then there's the worship followed by the worshipers. And then the next one is all about the worship. The focus is on the worshipers, us. So the first half, the focus is on Allah. Then it pivots here, Iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'in, and then it switches to the focus being on us. First Allah, then us. So there's some amazing symmetry. Then there's grammatical symmetry. So it's amazing when you read this. There's a beauty that comes out that's quite remarkable and amazing. And it helps you understand the meanings better. It makes them more profound and deeper. And at the end of the day, this is an ijtihad of, this is kind of like tafsir, but it does help. The tafsir is very useful. People's insights on the Quran are useful. But you should all try to think about the Quran yourself and develop your own insights and your own reflections. And sometimes you'll come up with things, you'll be amazed. The Quran can still bring out insights. You might think, well, we had 1400 years and the greatest minds thought about the Quran. Everything we need to know is in the books of tafsir. If that were the case, then why does Allah say, فَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ? Why do you make tadabbur of the Quran? Why does Allah ask you to make tadabbur? The fact is, every single time people look at things and come up with things, 90% of the time you'll come up with things that people already came up with, but there's still a possibility you'll come up with insights or nuances, perhaps. Nuances is a better word, not brand new meanings, but nuances that maybe other people didn't see prior to that. My own Shaykh Maulana Islahi, and I'll end with that. He spent 50 years of his life teaching, but no more than that actually, because he started leading prayers at like in his teens. He said once that every time he read Surah Yusuf, the story of Yusuf, it's a story with details and facts. But he said there hasn't been a time that he's read Surah Yusuf except he found new ideas and new insights every single time without fail, as if he's reading it for the first time. So that's what the Quran does. That's the kalam of Allah Azza wa Jal. May Allah give us an approach. May Allah help us approach the Quran and develop insights with the Quran, develop a relationship with the Quran. And may Allah bless all of you. I have to end there. It's exactly 12 o'clock. And we will continue next week. I don't think we have time for questions, but you can put it on the discussion boards. We have another class coming up, inshallah.
Inshallah, jazakumullah khairan. There was a quick question about somebody asking, is Yusuf Islahi rahimahullah related to Amin Islahi rahimahullah?
No, so Islahi is the name of, like, when you come from that school called Madrasatul Islah. It's kind of like Nadwi. Everyone asks, like, is Akram Nadwi related to Abul Hasan Ali Nadwi? No, Nadwatul Ulama is a college. Like thousands and thousands of people graduate from there, have the title Nadwi. Same thing, Islahi. Madrasatul Islah is a school in um, is it Azamgara? Oh, so it's in India. That what Maulana Farahi was associated with. Madrasatul Islah. Anyone who graduates from there, their title is Islahi. Like Azhari. Someone comes from Azhar University, Al Azhari. So Amin Ahsan Islahi, just quickly. So Maulana Farahi, the great Quranic scholar, he had two students, Akhtar Ahsan Islahi and Amin Ahsan Islahi. Amin Ahsan Islahi wrote the book Tadabbur al-Quran, the Tafsir Tadabbur al-Quran. Akhtar Ahsan Islahi did not write any book. But among most scholars, experts, they say that Akhtar Ahsan Islahi was a better student of Farahi, and he was the teacher of our Maulana Yusuf Islahi. Amin Ahsan Islahi continued the work of Farahi and wrote a book, Tadabbur al-Quran. It's remarkable, but it's many people say that it departs from Farahi, so it doesn't. There's some issues with the book, but still, it's worth reading. It's remarkable. Wallahu a'lam.
Jazakumullah khairan. Thank you so much